Manjeka. Welcome to the museum lecture series. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Melbourne Museum, where we all work, is built on the unceded lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders and communities, both past and present. And I am also speaking to you from Wurundjeri country up in Brunswick tonight. So my name is Kimberly Moulton and I'm the Senior Curator for Southeastern Aboriginal Collections for Museums Victoria. And as our museums remain closed, we're so grateful to be able to reach out to you in this way, and thank you for joining us tonight. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Zoom webinar format, it's quite different to a Zoom meeting. So rest assured, we can't be seeing you in your lounge room, and you can eat your dinner in your pajamas and we won't know. This is interactive though, so there will be a Q&A button at the bottom, and please post any questions that you'd like answered, and as the presenters talk, I'll facilitate the question and answer session at the end. But do bear with us as we have more than 200 households joining us tonight, and that's so exciting. So thank you all for coming and joining in. But we may not get to everyone's questions. So please don't forget to follow us and add us on Twitter if you're a tweeter. And our handle is @lecturesmv. And we're also on Instagram or Facebook with the hashtag @museums, museums at home, or museum at home, that should be. So for those of you that haven't joined previously, Collecting the Curve is a 3-part lecture series, bringing you just a few of the team who have been documenting the Victorian experience of this pandemic. Tonight's speakers bring you stories of communities surviving together, and they reveal the objects and voices that will tell a story of resilience, resistance, and adaptation for future generations. Before we begin with our speakers, tonight we're going to be joined by Michelle Stevenson, Head of Society and Technology, who have been leading this, Michelle's been leading this cross-disciplinary project. Michelle will give us a little insight into how the project has been developed and its aims. So I'll hand over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Kim. I'll just share my screen. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that our museums are situated on, the Bunurong and Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to all First Peoples joining us tonight. COVID-19 has impacted, disrupted and changed so many aspects of our lives in a way not seen in Victoria since World War II. Now as then, there are wonderful stories of communities and neighbours coming together to provide support in what's been challenging and uncertain times for all of us. However, we've also seen public health measures which have divided, segregated and singled out localities and communities. And here we have an example of those measures across time and place. The Checkpoint Barclay artwork, a comment on the ring fencing of 10 hotspot suburbs in June, and underneath a Christmas card from Carl Muffler to his wife, both of whom had restrictions placed on their freedom and movement during World War II as a result of being German citizens living in Victoria. I'd like you to cast your mind back to the start of the year. What was your first experience of the pandemic? What's defined the past 8 months for you? What objects and stories would you choose to document the pandemic for future generations? Over the past 8 months, I've worked together with an amazing team of over 20 curators, collection managers, photographers, conservators, digital creators and front of house staff from across the museum to develop the work in progress that is Collecting the Curve, a project that aims to capture and preserve your experiences of the pandemic in Victoria's State Collection, And tonight I'll give you a brief introduction before our panellists share their work in more detail. As the pandemic began to unfold in March, two of our curators, Michael and Joe, started thinking about how they might document the pandemic in relation to their collections. But as the scale of the pandemic and its impact became apparent, we quickly realised that the work of two curators would not be enough to create a legacy of this defining moment in our history for current and future generations. We began by developing a framework and an agreed collecting approach, covering things such as types of material, number of stories, ethics, and our approval process. 13 sub-collections sit under 4 high-level themes: flattening, living, adapting, and remembering the curves. And we added a 5th theme, documenting the curves, to capture our own work documenting this pandemic. To develop the framework, we used our own existing areas of expertise within the museum, as well as what we saw, as well as some of the emerging trends that we saw in regards to Victoria's response to the pandemic. And this framework has stood the test of time pretty well over the past 8 months. The frameworks allowed us to develop a collection that has both breadth and depth. Our targeted approach, rather than conducting a large-scale public call-out via social media, as many other organisations have done, has assisted us in documenting Victorian experiences of the pandemic as they happen, and rapidly adding those items to the state collection so that people are seeing their experiences reflected in the State Museum. This rapid response approach enables us to capture and document in depth much of the ephemeral material and experiences of the pandemic, which can be difficult to capture even as little as a year after the event. However, not everything has a 2-week turnaround from identification to state collection item. Some stories take time to develop, to build trust and relationships with communities, to work through the ethical issues that come with contemporary collecting, and sometimes just to see how an event or an issue will unfold. Having so many staff working on the project allows people to dip in and dip out of it so that they don't get too much COVID fatigue, although that's something that we've all suffered from at one point or another. The frameworks also made it clear what the things that we're looking to collect for both staff and the public, allowing people to suggest stories and objects that might be of interest, enabling us to develop relationships and sub-projects as required. For the Living the Curve theme, the stories from the Towers project, which Lisa will speak to tonight, is an excellent example of how this has happened in action, or is happening in action. The team also never stopped looking for opportunities, and the Checkpoint Barclay artwork would have to be one of my favourite examples of the team's passion and responsiveness for this project. Shared on our WhatsApp, there was a resounding yes to collect it. Beck found the artist and got permission to acquire it, and that same day, Lorenzo was out there to photograph it and wheeled the wire cutters so that we could collect it before it was removed. As our mandate is not just to document history, but to also make it accessible, the project's also expanded to include a number of public outputs to share objects and stories as they're acquired. These include digital products, a linked education program, and displays that we look forward to sharing with you when we reopen. And of course, this lecture series. I'm often asked about the project's duration, and we've just done a review to determine which themes we're actively or sporadically collecting, what we've completed, and we've also noted stories that we might revisit in the future to explore some of the longer-term impacts of the pandemic. As well, we've identified gaps, and from that we've pulled together a series of discrete mini projects that we'd like to focus on as a team or in small groups to get maximum impact across those in a really short time frame. I'd now like to hand back to Kim so that Catherine, Moya and Lisa can share some of the amazing work and stories that they're currently working on as part of our Living the Curve theme.
Thank you, Michelle. That was a great overview on a really significant project for Museums Victoria. Now, before I introduce our main speakers, I wanted to let you know that there is a brief 3-question poll that you can answer at any time, well, for the next five minutes or so. It just helps us get a sense of how many people are enjoying this series, and it only takes a few seconds to do. So if you can, we'd really appreciate it if you could fill that out for us. Our next speaker is Catherine Forge. Catherine is a curator and writer based in the Society and Technology Department at Museums Victoria. And Catherine's currently working on neighbourhood life during COVID-19. This work is focused on documenting stories of how individuals and neighbourhoods are adapting to life with coronavirus. Catherine first started at Museums Victoria in 2007 and has previously worked on a range of collections, including the Victorian Bushfire Collection, the Victorian Women on Farms Gathering Collection, and the Invisible Farmer Project. I'm going to hand it over to Catherine now, and we're going to hear about her work with communities. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, and thank you also to everyone that's made the time to come along tonight. I'm just going to share my screen for you. So tonight I thought would be a nice opportunity to talk about some of the stories that I've been collecting about neighbourhoods adapting through lockdown. So, oh, sorry, is everyone there? Yeah, sorry. Neighbourhoods adapting through lockdown. So particularly how neighbourhoods, individuals and local communities have been supporting one another through these really challenging times. So one of the first projects I was really wanting to talk about was the Teddy Bear in the Window project. So this was a beautiful project by photographer Myra Holmes. She was very aware of what was happening with the teddy bears in her neighbourhood as they, and I'm sure we all remember that teddy bears and soft toys started to appear in windows during lockdown at the beginning of March. This was really a movement that wasn't just happening in Melbourne and Victoria, but worldwide. Inspired by the children's book by Michael Rosen, We're Going on a Bear Hunt. Children in Victoria were encouraged to walk through their neighbourhoods looking for teddy bears. Now, Myra is pictured on the left here. She's the photographer that took these wonderful photographs. She ended up walking through her neighbourhood for 2 months or 3 months and captured hundreds of photographs with a long lens of the teddy bears. And I thought it would be nice just to show you some of the photographs that we ended up acquiring into the collection and reading an essay that Myra had written about her experience of photographing the teddies. She said, "As I walked with my dog around my local neighbourhood streets, discovering these teddies was a heartwarming sight. Even as an adult, it seemed they were each saying a quiet and friendly hello to those passing by and reaching out with the message that although we were strangers, we were also part of a community and together during these challenging times. During this time, I had the frightening experience of losing sight in one eye, and even after surgery in early May, I could not see very well. I was unable to drive, and working from home was challenging, so I began to take my camera with me as it had automatic focus, and it gave me great pleasure as I walked to take these photos. It also gave a reason to explore the streets in my neighbourhood, which made me feel more connected to my local community during the lockdown. When a crisis like this happens, which brought much fear and much uncertainty, these teddies and toys became a small symbol of warmth and friendliness." I'd like to talk to you now about another wonderful project with photographer Julie Ewing. So Julie, during the first series of lockdowns, was not able to work in the way that she usually would. So Julie is a family, newborn and maternity photographer, and her business was unable to continue in the same way when the lockdowns were initiated. So she had an idea to start taking photographs of her neighbours across the fence, socially distant with a long lens, and capture that moment in time. She started off just with her local neighbours, but then as that went on, she set up a Facebook page and started offering complimentary photo shoots to anyone in her region. So initially it was going to be a small project, and it grew into a project where she had, I think in the end, over 120 households and 60 local businesses in the Fairfield region on Station Street. I worked with Julie. I'm very grateful for her to talk through the photographs that she took. And the difficult part was actually choosing which ones we would include in the collection because she'd taken such wonderful photos. The other thing that she had done is she'd sent a question and answer sheet to all of the people that she'd photographed, asking them questions about what lockdown had been like for them, what the challenges were, and what the highlights might have been if there were any at the time. This is a woman that was living alone during lockdown number one, Lorraine. And I have to be honest and say, when I first read her beautiful reflection, I cried. It was really, it captured the feeling of what it was like for her. She said, "I'm nearly 80 and I still drive, but the lockdown means that I'm mostly just sitting inside watching TV. I have enough to watch, but it's just really, really boring. I've found that being alone all the time is really hard." Lorraine had been disconnected from her family who live in rural Victoria. She wasn't able to see them, but she did then go on to say that it was amazing to have the support of her local community. So her street set up a WhatsApp group and they began to connect on WhatsApp. And she also found the very experience of being photographed really cathartic and something to look forward to. And she said, "I was really excited to have my photo taken. The last time that happened was when I got married." Julie also photographed some events as they happened. So, for example, the Anzac Day commemorations that happened on the streets. So the light up the dawn services, people coming together at 6 a.m., not knowing if they would see their neighbours, not knowing what the event would be like. But she went with her photographs and her camera and captured her neighbours. One of the interesting things when choosing and selecting and going through this process of working out which photos to capture, it becomes really difficult if you don't have a story. And I think this is one of the time-consuming things that happens in the work, is that to understand the story, we really need to reach out and connect with community. And I've been so grateful for the community members that have been photographed and having them talk to us about the photos. So for this one, initially, I wasn't sure what was happening and what the family had been going through. And the woman that is standing at the front, Simone, submitted a story to us to explain some of her experiences of COVID. Simone was going through chemotherapy during this period, and what she reflected on has really given us some beautiful understandings of the healthcare system and going through chemotherapy during lockdown. And she said, "Before COVID, I was allowed to have a support person or two come along with me into day oncology. But because of COVID, I now have to go it alone. This has been really hard. I'm usually dropped by my sons and husband at the hospital door, and I can see the pain in their eyes, knowing I'm going in alone. The human side of medical treatment has been robbed by COVID. We can't see the smiles of the nurses or receive the hugs that we used to." Simone also reflected on some of the silver linings during this time, and she said, "The best thing has been spending more time with the boys. As a family, we have really loved being together as life has slowed down. It is a good thing to be able to slow down and to not rush about, so you can appreciate things that really matter, like family, friends, the outdoors, and just how beautiful nature is. I've learnt to eat well, worry less, and not take things for granted, especially my health and freedom." Julie also found herself photographing a wedding from across the fence, a couple that had been wanting to get married for a very long time and didn't want to put their wedding date forward any further. And in their reflection, they said, "We decided to go ahead and get married, as it was an important thing to do, with the recent changes in law in 2017 making it now legal. We were planning a much larger celebration on this date, as the day itself was very important to us, being 20 years together. With plans well underway for a decent sized party, everything came to an abrupt halt with COVID-19 emerging and changing everyone's way of living and being in the world immediately. It happened overnight. It all changed. Our sons helped us celebrate on the day. They are 17 and 13. We had a great day, and we are so pleased that we went ahead when we did, as things only got worse with the pandemic after our wedding." So it's been really interesting working with Julie on these photographs, because she took the photographs in lockdown number one. We're calling it number one, but during the first lockdown. And when we went into a second lockdown, there was a different mood. And I started working on this project on the second lockdown. And it's been a really interesting process, because it was not possible to go and take photos. So we're very grateful to have had the beautiful photos that Julie took in the first lockdown. But one of the things that we have to consider is that they capture a moment in time, and they capture people that at that time were able to be photographed. So one of the interesting methodological questions as we're working on this is to think, how can we capture the stories of the second lockdown? And how can we capture stories of people that are going through different experiences? I don't have the answers to that right now, but I thought it was an interesting point. So when I started on this project, my aim was to go out and take photographs and to do oral history interviews, which is how we would usually do our field work. But with lockdown coming back again, that became very difficult, obviously. But we've been very grateful for things such as Facebook, which have provided a really interesting way for communities to come together. And the Kindness Pandemic is a Facebook group that has now got hundreds of thousands of followers, and they've been sharing some beautiful stories of community coming together. We came across these journal entries by Kofi Aden, a 13-year-old who has been sharing his experience of what life in lockdown has been like. So he started to write a journal on a daily basis, and his father would add this journal to Facebook. And as you can see here, this is the format for how they were sharing. And it became a really beautiful and positive way for communities to connect and to really, I think what was happening was that Kofi was inspiring other people to keep and write gratitude journals. Just got some examples here of the sorts of things that Kofi was talking about. So being able to see his grandma again, his love for gardening, his experience of being a 13-year-old doing remote learning and education, thinking about the healthcare workers that were working. So when I saw these on Facebook, I thought they were really, really beautiful reflections, and they speak to a number of issues. But the question is, when do we go and collect these? Kofi was still in the process of writing them, and he was still using this journal on a daily basis. So this is one of the stories that I'm talking about tonight that I haven't gone and collected all of this yet. I've spoken with Kofi, and I've spoken with his father, and what's been really wonderful is to learn more about the family and about his father, Abdi, who came over to Australia as a refugee. Came through from Somalia, and given that we weren't able to do an interview or take photographs in person, I sent a few questions through, and Abdi and his son Kofi have sent some really brilliant responses, and I've been so grateful for them to be communicating with us and explaining why Kofi wrote the gratitude journal and what inspired him with the journal. And Abdi said, as a refugee, I lost everything, including family, belongings, culture, and identity. Because I've come from a war-torn country, I often tell my family you can always start from scratch. Health is more important. COVID-19 has given me more time to reflect on the things I'm grateful for. Times are hard, however, there are so many things we should be grateful for, including food and clean water. So initially I was just looking at the gratitude journal and thinking how wonderful that was. But when I started to talk to Kofi and Abdi, they told me how important their community had been to them, and in particular, the refugee community and the community of children that were in the towers during those hard lockdowns. Kofi wrote some beautiful letters to the children in the lockdown, and then the letters were returned. And there's so much going on there, so many beautiful stories to draw out. And Kofi then got involved in also mask awareness with the Somali community in Somali language, so that the community could be receiving messages and working on that level. So in closing, I just wanted to thank the community that have been working with us at the museum. This is very much a contemporary collecting project. We're all living through COVID. We're all in the middle of being in lockdown. There's been a lot of things that have made the work challenging, and there's been a lot of things that have made us have to adapt and work in different ways. But I think the one thing that I have learnt through talking to and working with the people is that there are so many amazing stories out there of how communities have adapted and how they are working together. So thank you to everyone that's been involved, and I will stop sharing now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. That was wonderful to hear about your work, and I can't wait to read more of Kofi's journal. What a beautiful thing to be doing. So now I'll introduce our next speaker, and that's Dr. Moya Mcfadyen. Dr. Moya Mcfadyen is the Senior Curator of Migration and Cultural Diversity in the Society and Technology Department for Museums Victoria. And Moya is responsible for developing the museum's migration and diversity related collections and exhibitions. Her curatorial work focuses on the application of material culture and memory of migration and cultural diversity. It also includes interpretations of Australian migration, refugee and asylum seeker narratives, as well as museums as sites of social activism and their potential for developing relationships of genuine engagement with communities. Moya's most recent exhibition achievements include the following at Immigration Museum: Becoming You, an Incomplete Guide, which Moya is lead curator of, and that's due to open this year in 2020. Love, the lead curator, which was in 2018. And British Migrants, Instant Australians, which Moya was lead curator of in 2017. Integral to all of these exhibitions has been Moya's engagement with diverse communities and creative practitioners, and developing innovative approaches to storytelling through authentic voice. Moya's recent publications include chapters in Museums Activism and Migration Memories, Oral Histories and Heritage in Australia, 2019. So I'm going to hand it over to Moya now, and she's going to share a little bit about two documentation projects she's working on with a Chinese migrant family, and also the Victorian Sikh volunteer community. So thank you so much, Moya.
Thanks so much, Kim, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, hopefully that's working okay. So it's really exciting to be able to share some of our work in progress on the museum's Collecting the Curve project. And I would too just like to take a moment to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking today, the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the East Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. So as the theme for this second lecture in our series is Communities Surviving Together, I will highlight just two stories which demonstrate forms of community collective responses, one a family within a neighbourhood and one a network of community organisations united by their faith and their commitment to volunteerism. So the first case study I'd like to share is the story of Zheng Li and Grace Ji, who arrived in Melbourne as students from China in 2005. They married, obtained permanent residency and citizenship, had two daughters, Elizabeth and Esther, and settled in Glen Waverley. The Lee's family experience of the pandemic began when they travelled to China for the first time as a family in January 2020, only to be caught up in the lockdown in China, and then again on their return to Melbourne, where they were an early example of self-isolation. So this story has evolved as a migration story for the collection, as well as one family's experiences of the impacts of COVID across two countries. The family came to our attention through what has become the popular COVID pastime of chalk drawing in driveways and on footpaths. And after their period of self-isolation during walks in local parks and streets, the family noticed people doing street art and placing teddy bears in windows, as Catherine has so evocatively demonstrated. So inspired, Grace, Elizabeth and Esther drew chalkboard drawings on their driveway whilst their husband and father Zheng was at work and told to park the car in the street when he came home. The girls were particularly inspired by a cartoon book, Dogman, for their illustrations, and young Elizabeth reflects, Dogman is a very funny and interesting story with flipperama. I love the story so much. I thought everyone else would like it too. They, the neighbours, would smile at it when they walked past. When Melbourne locked down at the end of March, the family had chalk delivered from Bunnings, and an organic series of drawings continued to evolve, this time with more emphasis on hearts and other symbols. Zheng reflects, the kids are loving street arts now. They are occasionally painting here and there. I believe it has been very good to have such beautiful chalk painting on the driveway. We could see the big smiles on the faces when people stopped there watching. At least it was one of the inspiring things we did for ourselves and the local community. The museum was offered digital photographs taken by their parents of the drawings and the children in the act of creating them. Further conversations revealed that the Lees also had photographs of their trip to visit family in China, which would help us to represent the experiences of Australian families during this time. One of the challenges for collecting photographs now is that most are taken on mobile phones, so that the resolution quality is frequently not high. So we just need to adapt to this reality if we are to continue acquiring family and community photographs for the collection. Trying to secure actual objects to represent these experiences can also be challenging, but the Lee family still had the chalks, dyes and rollers the girls used to create their drawings. I'm very keen to acquire these, but one of the complications of trying to develop collections quickly, remotely and under lockdown is that curators and conservators are unable to actually physically access the objects, and collection managers are unable to collect them from donors and transport them to the museum. So we must wait until we are able to view the material and assess their durability and storage and display needs before being able to complete the acquisition process. The family has been consulted at every step regarding the selection of images and their use, the developing of their family narrative and the display of their story. And this collection is one of 6 stories featuring in a pop-up installation at the Immigration Museum about the Collecting the Curve project once we're able to open again. The story documentation has had its more challenging aspects as well. Zheng also briefly reflected on the difficult subject of some small but noticeable racism as China became the focus not only of the source of the virus, but also due to heightened and heated media reporting on trade and national security. At a time of community crisis and emphasis on neighbourhood support and connection, this has been a disappointing development, but not one the family understandably really wished to dwell on. So consequently, in this collection, we now have a well-rounded story which demonstrates how families collectively act to participate in their neighbourhoods and which provides a transnational narrative with the family moving between countries and experiencing the impacts of the pandemic in two places, in two hemispheres. So the Lee family represents how families are interacting with their neighbourhoods during the pandemic to stay connected and share simple moments of humanity. The second case I'd like to share is on a bigger and more complex scale and very much a work in progress. Museums Victoria has partnered with the Victorian Sikh community to document, preserve and share stories of volunteering and community service during the COVID-19 pandemic. All the participating Sikh organisations were active for many years prior to the pandemic, providing a range of community services, including in particular food relief to vulnerable people, but also domestic violence support, counselling and training, health services support, and attendance at community events. But it is fair to say that during the bushfires in 2019 and 20, and now the pandemic, that their activities has certainly ramped up a notch. In the wake of the pandemic, the Sikh philosophy of selfless service has seen volunteers mobilise across Melbourne and Victoria to deliver free meals to those in need, including the homeless, international students, the unemployed, the elderly and single parents, and Melbourne's public housing tower residents during the lockdown. These acts of kindness from Sikh organisations have fostered hope, fed those in need and delivered support and comfort during a time of hardship. They have also spread a message of inclusiveness and united people of all ages, cultural backgrounds, religions and demographics. The plan is to document those volunteer services during this time. While the museum does not have the resources to document the activities of every community organisation active during the pandemic, and there are many, the Sikh volunteers are a highly motivated and organised string of organisations with wide-reaching networks and range of activities, so they have evolved as a narrative we felt we could do some justice to. This project involves a genuine community engagement process, which is being driven by the museum and the Sikh community organisations in partnership. This slide shows a list of the 7 agencies who are participating in the project, and each has a representative on our project working group. Their COVID response activities collectively service the cities of Melton, Hume, Mitchell, Casey, Cardinia, Mornington, Monash and Dandenong, as well as some regional areas. So this really offers the project great reach in representing multiple localities. We held our first Zoom meeting last month, which included 9 enthusiastic and generous representatives from the 7 organisations, along with myself and my colleague Catherine Forge, who presented previously. And a number of them have joined us this evening, so I'd like to acknowledge and welcome them tonight. So this demonstrates how consultation processes must be undertaken under COVID restrictions. Ordinarily, this kind of gathering would be held in a physical rather than a virtual space, an environment much more sympathetic to first meetings and working carefully through collective expectations, which can, of course, be unrealistically high, and cultural respect and sensitivities, but needs must. The working group expressed their desired outcomes for the project as to show that Sikh communities are cross-faith and cross-community in terms of their impact, reveal the diversity of volunteers involved and people served, which go well beyond the Sikh community, develop a legacy for future generations of Sikhs in Victoria, to document displays of selflessness in the Sikh community, and provide public education on Sikhs for the general public. Of particular importance for everyone is that this is a democratic community, and while many Sikh organisations are involved and the stories will emanate from their individual networks, the project is not about promoting these individual organisations or highlighting the work of a few individuals as representative. Of course, this laudable ideal makes for a more complex but ultimately more rewarding project, and we are currently working with the community organisation representatives to develop a process for a community call-out for submissions. The call-out will have two approaches, one via the 7 Sikh volunteer organisations out to their network of individual volunteers, and the other to work with the 7 organisations to select a sample number of agencies that they serve. So, for example, hospitals, aged care facilities, food banks, police stations, public housing, international student groups, homeless organisations, domestic violence agencies, in order to provide an achievable collective response outcome, which demonstrates industry cooperation and collaboration with the Victorian Sikh community. The museum will provide a call for contributions that the organisation representative will circulate through these two types of networks. Responses will be coordinated through our primary Sikh contact and then all sent to the curators for assessment. Thus, the organisations are conduits for the project, but ultimately the documentation is focused on the individual volunteers, the selected key service agencies, and hopefully down the track, some of the people the volunteers are supporting. The museum is looking for written reflections, which may be in English or Punjabi, on volunteer experiences during the pandemic. Also creative responses, such as poetry, songs and drawings that may express these experiences, and reflections from the agencies on their experiences of collaborating with the Victorian Sikh community during the pandemic. We are also after photographs documenting volunteer and collaborating industry activities like cooking, driving vans, distributing food, interacting with people, providing all sorts of support. And also objects which symbolise these activities. For example, food distribution containers, signs and banners, cooking utensils, recipes, food packaging in Punjabi. To participate, volunteers and agencies will need to provide their names and contact details with an email giving consent for their reflections to be acquired and published by Museums Victoria for any future exhibition, online, promotional and educational uses. We're not interested in anonymous contributions, and the museum will be in touch with contributors in the future about their story and how it is used. And some questions for participants include, how have your personal values inspired you to volunteer during the pandemic? What have been the highlights and challenges of your participation or collaborations? What has been the community response to your activities? How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on your day-to-day life, and in particular your experience of volunteerism? And how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on your organisation's operations and activities? The stage after this is to see if we can engage some of the communities who have been served by the Sikh organisations directly or through partner industry groups to document the interactions and impact of the Sikh volunteer activities. This will be a more sensitive endeavour, as so many of these people are vulnerable, their identities confidential, and sharing their experiences might not be at the top of their to-do list. But through focusing on what the volunteers have offered, might provide a safe way into some of these stories if people are willing. Ultimately, the end result of this project, we hope, will be a selection of stories which will be represented digitally by the museum's Collecting the Curve website, and a selection of stories, images and objects which will be acquired into the museum's collection. This material, we hope, will span a variety of geographic locations, age, gender, cultures, motivations and activities of volunteers and recipients of the support. The key to success will be building and maintaining trust between the museum, the organisations and the storytellers by consulting every step of the way and honouring the agreed project aims. This also requires establishing clear protocols for communications and collecting and realistic project expectations. So in conclusion, I hope these two stories have provided you with some insights into the diversity of stories we are documenting as part of the Collecting the Curve project, the ways communities at both the family and networked community level are responding to community interactions and support, and the amount of commitment, engagement and trust building required to really represent these stories with depth and integrity so that our communities feel supported, respected and heard. While this is a rapid response contemporary collecting project, our outcomes can't always be quick and final. As my colleague Lisa Hilly will continue to demonstrate shortly, working with communities is complex, resource intensive, and a long-term investment in the museum's relationships and collections. It's history as it's happening, but in terms of collection development and community engagement practice, it can't always happen all at once. It is a short-term project, but offering a long-term legacy. Thanks very much. Back to you, Kim. I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you so much, Moya. It's so wonderful to hear about your curating and your approach to methodology in that work, but also what a wonderful project and initiative by the Sikh community. And it was so lovely to see the beautiful artworks as well by Esther and Elizabeth. So we're going to move on to our next speaker now, and our next speaker is Lisa Hilly. And Lisa is passionate about telling lesser-known stories and overlooked histories. Drawing upon her Papua New Guinean culture and heritage, Lisa has shared knowledge with Museums Victoria collections and exhibitions on material culture relating to mourning practices of women from Oro Province, research, language translation, and community consultation support for the Queen Alexandra butterfly from the Managalis Conservation Plateau, embedding Gutuna Taloi language within prehistoric narratives for the Watom Island ceramics known as Lapita pottery. Lisa's previous role as collections manager enabled local and global First Peoples communities and researchers to access Museums Victoria collections. Lisa is a recipient of a postgraduate 1854 Museums Victoria Scholarship and is a current member of the Oceania Working Party for the Australian Dictionary of Biography. Lisa is currently an experienced developer in exhibitions. And tonight, Lisa will be giving us a talk on an important project with the communities impacted by the public housing tower lockdown. And she will be sharing some of the insights into her work. So I'll hand it over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to share a little bit of insight into a Collecting the Curve story that's currently in development. Before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Woiwurrung language group of the Kulin Nation, whose land I'm currently on. And if you're tuning in from outside of Victoria or Australia, my background is the Kulin Nation's calendar, and it references the 6 seasons for Kulin country, and right now we're in tadpole season. So I'll just get my presentation up. It's not. There we go. Okay. Stories from the Towers is one of several initiatives that aims to ensure the Victorian experiences of COVID-19 are collected and documented. The story is being developed together with Moya Mcfadyen, who you just heard from, and Rebecca Carland, who's Senior Curator of History, as well as key community stakeholder and consultant Arij Schnur. The immediate lockdown of 9 public housing towers on the 4th of July in inner city Melbourne came as a shock and reverberated right around the globe, a truly unprecedented measure of healthcare. As an experienced developer, my role in the museum is to capture the heart of the stories that we share with our audiences. Most importantly, I ensure that story content is engaging and accessible for all our audiences. We're in the very early stages of documenting this event and story. Some things that we need to be mindful of in documenting this story is residents having the capacity first and foremost, language interpretation and translation, and sensitivity and awareness of re-traumatization of police enforcement to residents of the towers. The challenge we have in developing and collecting this story is, as a state cultural institution, we're going into a community who feels as though they have been failed by the state in regards to their human rights. We need to be able to convince a community that collecting their story is of value, when they may not necessarily visit or see the museum as having any value to them. At the heart of this story and event is how people mobilised both inside and outside the Nine Towers through mobile devices and social media platforms. The mobile phone has become one of the most powerful tools in the world today, particularly for communities who are Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse, or socially marginalised. The combined power of mobile devices and the internet has allowed greater access and dissemination of knowledge and information that are of benefit to these communities. The following images have been mostly sourced from public social media accounts. I searched under specific hashtags and key individual accounts of people and communities who were on the ground during a hard lockdown, sharing information for the masses. So this is an excerpt of the actual letter that was sent to the residents across all 9 buildings by the state government. Bearing in mind that the majority of the residents who live in those towers have English as their second, third, or fourth language. So this was a 4-page letter that used formal legal jargon with references to the Health Acts and state-bound policies. Residents receiving this, this would have been jarring and inaccessible to them. At 3:55 a.m., Wane Lefrere posted on his Twitter account this. I'm just going to give you all a minute to read it. Together with residents, relatives, and allies, they created a COVID-19 community notice board to share information across mobile devices. Mobile communication was happening between individuals and community members outside the public towers to interpret and translate the state government detention directions, as what they were called. It was communicated in a way that was caring, used soft new tones and design, and in languages that they could understand and access. And they did it in less than 24 hours. This is the plain English version that they translated from the state government's 4-page document, and then they translated this version into the 11 different languages. So how did they survive during the lockdown? Prior to the hard lockdown, AMSA, the Australian Museum Social Services Agency, were already active in providing and delivering halal food across all of metropolitan Melbourne. When the immediate lockdown came in, they were one of the first to respond. So here is just like, this is from their Instagram AMSA youth account, and so you can see that they've got all the 9 towers there, the addresses and the amounts of food that they delivered, and then they were also communicating in 6 different languages with the residents. These are some of the members of youth AMSA who were on the ground at one of the towers across Flemington, Kensington. There were also legal observers on the ground. There were some incidents between food deliveries by AMSA youth with state officials, and so there were legal observers to ensure that humane treatment was enforced. People were there to document and capture images on their phones. Therapist Tigers Kabede was on the ground as well and circulating information online to support residents. There was a lot of solidarity between communities within the towers and Indigenous people. And so this was an information kit that was shared on social media for any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that were living in the towers. And once the majority of the 9 towers kind of came out of that lockdown period, it was just one tower, which was at Alfred Street, that remained in further lockdown. And so this was like further information that was kind of shared across so that residents were still informed of what to do. A coalition was formed, Voices from the Blocks. A media statement was circulated to advocate and ensure humane treatment of residents by state government officials. You can look up any of the hashtags that you see on any of the social media platforms, and you'll see a lot of the documented experiences of what was happening on the ground as it happened. This was a post shared by Antoinette Braybrook, who is the CEO of Jurovac, which is an Aboriginal Women's Association. And these were some of the youth who were on the ground, also living inside the towers, that were sharing and capturing information. So this is how information was getting circulated across social media. So it gets very noisy in social media, and the most important stories that we are yet to source are from the residents. So I've only found a few, but given the challenges that we do have, and we're still in very early stages, we want to ensure that we capture stories from across all different demographics and ages that live in the towers. I came across this post by a fellow who goes by the Instagram handle of Kung Fu High Kicks, together with he's Jewish, and two of the other women, their handles are there. They were Muslim women. They were going in once some of the residents came out of the lockdown, and they were going in to check in on their supplies. So he shared some stories about some of the residents inside. He spoke with an elderly Vietnamese lady who was told that she was free to move around, that her tower wasn't under lockdown, and that no one had told her until 5 p.m. that day. There was another story about a Turkish woman who was quite distressed. She needed to launder her towels and sheets, but has been told that she couldn't because all the laundries in the towers were shut and all the laundry was piling up, so she was getting stressed. There was another story about libraries being shut, and that VCE students needed to get online, and they didn't have iPads or laptops to go to do remote learning from home. Another story of an elder lady with colon cancer needed to have a telehealth appointment. She has no electronic device to do this with her doctor and is too scared to take public transport to go to the doctor. Her doctor has instructed her to do a telehealth appointment, but she doesn't have the technology. And lastly, the story of a mum with a young child who needed Ventolin. She was too scared to go out, doesn't know what to do or how to get Ventolin. So just finishing up, if there's one thing that this enduring and difficult experience has taught me as a human, is that whenever there's severe hardship, crisis, or a state of emergency, humans can do awful things. But in moments of despair, there's courageous acts of kindness and generosity that brings light to very dark places. And that's what I hope we can capture with stories from the towers. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. It's so incredible to see the action and movement that happened, and particularly looking at it on a sort of social media, through a social media lens rather, and on that platform, and it really shows how important and how influential social media can be in raising, the voices. And I think your work is really incredible in really capturing this time for those people that live in that community. So I think we're going to take some questions now. Excuse me. And if the speakers, maybe we can all join. And thank you for sending through your questions and staying on and listening to all of our amazing speakers. So the first question we have is around acquisition. And Jessica asks, could you please explain? So I might, I'm just going to read the question now, and then we can sort of maybe just all have a bit of a conversation around it, because I think it definitely relates to everybody here as curators. But could you please explain how you research and acquire collections, considering it's happening in real time? So for example, the photo series Across the Fence that Catherine, you spoke about, but I think that's really relevant, to everyone right now, because we are collecting in real time. So perhaps Catherine, you might speak to that first, and then we'll hear from the others.
Sure. Thank you, Kimberly. I think with Across the Fence, I'd seen exactly that. So I'd seen Julie posting her beautiful photos on Facebook, and they were kind of at the back of my mind, because it was months and months ago that she posted them before I contacted her. And when we went into lockdown too, so my original plan was to go and take photos myself. That's usually what we would do. We'd go and do the field work and take the photos. And then I just had in the back of my mind that she'd been doing that photo series. So I made contact with her personally, sent an email, and then we ended up having a few Zooms and catch-ups. And we've been contacting each other very regularly to make sure that we get the right story for all of the photos that have been included.
Great, thanks.
I could pop in. That I guess it's been really challenging to try and collect in real time, but it's not the first time we've collected contemporary material, of course, at the museum. We do it all the time, but I think it's really dependent on having a team, such a broad team across our disciplines and departments, who've been able to focus the mind, and so many people who have so many interests and areas of expertise are aware of all sorts of different things that are going on in communities and different kinds of responses to the pandemic. So collectively, we're all able to make each other aware of different kinds of stories and what's out there, and make either direct and make direct approaches. With the Sikh community, I actually had a conversation with Rahini Kapadath, who's the General Manager of the Immigration Museum. I knew she would have contacts with that community. And so I got her to introduce me into one of the key community members and made contact and went from there. So we also really draw on a lot of the really strong different kinds of diverse community networks that we all have who work at the museum across all of our areas. And that provides us with really immediate ways into community, and then things kind of snowball from there.
Yeah. And Lisa, did you want to talk a little bit about how you're sort of capturing the social media aspect of your project work?
Yeah, I guess when I first became aware of that the hard lockdown, I was already in a lockdown because my postcode was one of the hotspots, and so that was the only way I could actually follow what was happening. I couldn't actually go down to Flemington or North Melbourne to actually go and show support, and so my way of actually following it was by social media. And so I've just been approaching community via social media, because as Michelle mentioned earlier in her conversation, was building trust with community is really important. And as someone who works in a museum, when I approach community, I bring all the museum baggage with me, and so I've got to ensure that community feels safe, and that when I'm talking to them, they feel confident enough to actually share those images. And so I would just ask them, say, hey, this is the story I'm working on, would you mind sharing those images? And then I've just sort of kept them on file, and then once we figure out how to actually document that electronic data or electronic format, how do we do that? I think we're still figuring that out. And so then we go back to community and sort of just have the conversation with them. So I'm just filing everything for now, and then once we get to that point of documenting and actually putting it into the collection, then it can be formalized. We're using a story as like the anchor, which Beck, Moya and I have had conversations about, and then we're finding the material culture around that. So already I've actually done a whole lot of things that are relevant to actual material things rather than just electronic images.
Yeah. I think the relationships are the key here, aren't they? And so it's so core to our work at Museums Victoria, and as curators in our practice, it's really about strengthening and building and working on the relationships that we have and our colleagues have. Michelle, did you want to maybe speak a little bit about how, developing the methodology, the framework for collecting the curve, and how you considered this sort of real-time collecting within that?
Sure. So I think, as Moya touched on before, one of the real strengths of this project, we've done a lot of contemporary collecting at the museum. Certainly not a first for us, but the having over 20 staff working on this project at different times is a first. Kind of looking at our existing collections and where we had strengths and expertise was a key part in how we framed, how we developed that framework, as well as looking at what were some of those kind of emerging trends in the pandemic. But then to put that framework into action to do kind of rapid response collecting, we had to put in a number of kind of new processes. So we've gone to digital kind of rolling online acquisitions, for example. So normally we have quite a slow acquisition process. We're very careful and we consider things. For this, we're considering things just as much, but because of the ephemeral nature of the material, we've had to move quite quickly for some things. As Lisa said, we've developed a whole new range of processes around how we collect digital media. So everything from kind of working out how do you collect TikTok videos, Instagram accounts, all of these kind of new formats that we haven't worked with before. We've been setting up these processes kind of as we've gone along. So it's been a collective effort to think about what are the different types of, we've got that framework, so then how do we implement that in a practical way? And our collection management team really have been amazing in pulling together a lot of the behind the scenes processes to make that happen, including things like when we do physically bring objects onto site, having to quarantine them for 2 weeks so that in case they have COVID. So, there's a whole range of issues that our amazing collection management team have worked on really rapidly to enable us to do this.
Yeah.
To do this project.
Great, thank you. And speaking of physical collections, we have a question from Mark, and he asks, he says that a lot of the collecting has been electronic and via photography and social media. But what are the considerations around the physical materials from communities in the North Melbourne and Flemington towers? So, and I think also that question, you touched on that, Moya, also working with your communities as well. So perhaps who would like to go first? Jump in. What physical collections and considerations are you all thinking about, with your projects?
Oh, I've got one. So for stories from the towers, we're looking for a particular stubby holder that Pauline Hanson sent. So if anyone out there has one of those stubby holders, we would really like to get a hold of it. Really, really like to, please.
Thank you. There you go, audience. That's a job for you all.
That's our call out. That's for sure. Well, I guess there's no doubt that this kind of project has had a bit of an emphasis on digital material, but we are really trying to collect the tangible heritage as well. In my presentation, I mentioned that, so not did I just want to collect the images of the Lee family creating their drawings, but actually to try to collect the tools and equipment they use to actually produce those and give some materiality to that story as well. And as I mentioned, it's challenging because I've got a photo of them, but I can't actually go and have a look at them and see if what condition they're in, or if they're in a condition of deterioration. So we can't actually make those final decisions, until we actually see material. But some of the material too is quite new, so we know it doesn't have much in the way of conservation issues, Kim might like to speak to a wonderful face mask that she's collected from one of her community members, and I know one of our colleagues, Marita, who'll be speaking at next month's lecture, collected a couple of T-shirts relating to the Isolate Music from Home project and activity. So there are a variety of ways that collecting material, it can be in this kind of collecting, it can be quite ephemeral material, so that can make it a little more vulnerable in terms of our long-term collecting, but we are taking that into account, and if things end up not lasting forever, then so be it. We still need to collect what's happening at this time. Kim, I might let you jump in there.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I work in the First Peoples department, and I've been working with a couple of community members from Victoria, and one of them is Justice Nelson, and Justice is a Jara woman, and she's also on our Yulenge committee for Museums Victoria, which is our knowledge committee of elders and community members that we co-curate and work with on different projects. And at the beginning of the pandemic, Justice sort of, I guess, wanted to protect her family in the first instance, and decided to start making her own face masks. And so she made a series of face masks and used also Aboriginal designed material, and made them for her family, and then, you know, put them on Facebook, and started to get requests from across the community, you know, for her masks. And so what started as a kind of really reactionary response to protect her family and herself, and kind of, you know, deal with this pandemic that she found herself in, became a really big kind of or not business, but, you know, a thing like sharing with the community, I suppose, and sharing her incredible skills of making masks with the community. So that was a really nice story that we collected, and Moya's been working on that as well for a display that will be happening once we reopen at immigration museums. So yeah, it's really wonderful to include different stories like that. And another mask that I've collected is from a Wadawurrung woman, Diane Gilson, and she's an artist based in Ballarat. And she's been making the most incredible masks that are designed with sort of deep cultural stories to her country and to the some of the native flowers around her country. So it's also something that will be added into the collection, which is really exciting. We have time for one more question, so I might ask you all actually to just to comment. We've got a question here asking. Documenting the pandemic has been a unique project for Museums Victoria to undertake. What has personally surprised you about the project along the way? So perhaps if you all just want to have a little comment on what, you know, personally has surprised you, or you know, emotionally pulled the heartstrings.
I guess I could start. I think I would have to, in all honesty, say that if you'd asked me 6 months ago if myself and all my colleagues who are sitting all in their individual homes could somehow come together virtually and develop real-time collections in this way, I would have said, I don't think so. And I would have been completely wrong, because it's been amazing. Like, it's just been about sort of busting through the new technology and finding ways to be able to remotely connect with our communities, which can be really challenging because we're so used to being in physical face-to-face relationships with people that we work with, and sharing stories is a very emotional thing and involves a lot of trust building. So to be trying to do all of that remotely and try and collect material culture as well is really challenging, and I'm kind of amazed that we've done as much as we can as this huge team, and feel really proud of that too.
Okay, thanks, Moya. Who's next? Catherine.
Moya's just kind of said what I was thinking of saying so well, but I think it's just been, incredible. It's always incredible to work with community, and it's been a really emotional process. I mean, we're all going through our own experience of lockdown, and we've all got our own reasons why it's been difficult to be, whether we're working from home or however we're operating. And I've just been so grateful for the community that I've worked with, that they've taken the time to respond to, to emails and to share their story with us, and to do that with such, they've taken the time to do it. And I guess there's always those little stories that you think, you start working on it and you don't know how the story will develop, and then you find extra layers to the story. And that's why it's, really good to take that time to have a, hour conversation with someone that's taken the photos, or to, sit down virtually. So I guess it's, just grateful for the community that have participated in the project.
Thank you.
I guess for me, it's just it's how I entered my presentation. It was just the acts of kindness from humans in really difficult times. And I think, if this is our civilization's kind of like experience of hardship, in retrospect of like wars that have happened all around the world, I think we've kind of like, I think this is kind of like been my understanding of like, oh, this is what hardship is like for like on a mass scale globally, and this is how humans respond. And so that's probably been the most surprising and insightful thing, is just that as someone who's experienced lockdown and then working with humans who are even in more drastic lockdown measures, that despite like really difficult circumstances, it's a birthplace of like beautiful kindness and acts of generosity. Like I was really stunned by that, and you just hold on to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Me, I think, everyone said such amazing things about what's been powerful about this project, and certainly the buy-in of the team and the entire museum, for that matter, being engaged in this project and supporting it, and that kind of passion and engagement has been truly fantastic, and has really brought it to life and enabled us to capture so many incredible stories. But broader than that, just the willingness of the community across the state to share their stories, to work with us, to share some of those more difficult stories, because this has been a really challenging time for everyone, and for some people, far more than others. And so in allowing us to work with them to tell those stories as they're happening, or kind of not long after they've happened, has been surprising to be able to do that, in quite a contemporary way, not a while after the event. So just that general support and engagement and passion for people to have their stories represented in the state collection. It's been amazing.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing your work with us, and it's been a real pleasure hearing about that, and about your incredible practice as curators and experience developers. And I think that it's not often we get to share, our personal experiences and how important our relationships are. And like I said earlier, this is really about relationships, and at its core are the most amazing communities that are so generous in sharing their stories with us. So, that's thank you, and thank you for all the communities that have joined tonight, as well as I know you've joined in. Just in wrapping up, I just wanted to say thank you again for showing up and listening and engaging in the lecture series. And our final lecture is coming up, and that's on November the 18th. And that will be Adapting to the Curve, Panicking, Pivoting and Adapting. So I hope you can join us for this final instalment, and it will be the final instalment of the 3-part series. And this will be looking at the economic impact of lockdown. So from the forced closures, supermarket shortages, and widespread unemployment, to the agile manufacturing pivots, creative approaches to supply chains, and the jump start to the digital revolution. So we'll be covering a lot of different things within this last lecture, but it's really about how we've all, how Victorians at home and at work and play have adapted to, life in this pandemic. And one of the featured storylines will be the Isolate Melbourne Festival, so the online music festival that was born out of the need to support artists, crew, and music workers impacted by the pandemic. And we're really excited to be able to celebrate their success and the end of this lecture series. And there will be a really special performance by Moju with their powerful song, Native Tongue, that will be closing the lecture. So that's super exciting. And I hope that you can all join in on November the 18th for that. And we'll be advertising that, on our website and via all our social media, so you can join us then. But thank you for joining us, and thank you to all the speakers. You're all deadly, and enjoy the rest of your night. So good night.